David Davis, PC MP, almost was the leader of the Conservative Party. If he had been, I'd be sitting here now interviewing him in Downing Street. They chose the wrong man, alas, but he's still a real power in the land and a power in Parliament, which explains why he's got this fantastic office by the River Thames. I wanted to talk to him about the impasse over the Chilcot inquiry. David Davis, thanks for joining us on Sputnik. I described the membership of the Chilcot inquiry as a parade of establishment flunkies who were likely to throw the case against the Blair and Brown governments on the war. It seems I may have been wrong. They've stuck at their task quite doggedly, haven't they?
Yes, they have. And Chilcot, I mean, you might have had some reason because he's been involved in all the establishment inquiries down the years. And he's been a very trusted man by the British establishment. But he's been very honest and determined about this. And I think it's determination, actually, that counts more than anything else. So, yeah, I think when they eventually get it published, it will be a humdinger of a report. But there's a big question mark over the when.
For all the great achievements that you have, you're not really a part of the British establishment, but you know it. So why is the establishment proving so difficult over the issue of the documents that Chilcot says he needs before he can publish? After all, this is deeply embarrassing to set up a £7 million public inquiry and then have it unable to publish its report because of what will be seen in the country and the world as a cover-up.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, when you started out down the route of having an inquiry like this, it is assumed they will see all of the secret information and publish that which they think is necessary. The whole point of having someone like Chilcot in charge of the inquiry is he is the sort of person you think the establishment would trust to make decisions on what ought to be able to be put in the public domain. So it's an assumption right at the beginning that you can publish things that affected the decision on the war. And that includes things like conversations between Tony Blair and his cabinet, between the various ministers, between Tony Blair and the Allies, most notably George Bush. So those were all written into the remit on day one. So what's happened is all of a sudden the various members of the establishment, for different reasons I think, are hiding behind a whole series of conventions which, whilst they normally apply, shouldn't apply to an inquiry into a war.
The permanent secretary, who is in the name of the cabinet, one presumes, blocking the release of these documents in the report, was of course the right-hand man of Mr. Blair at the time of the war. Is he covering up for Mr. Blair or covering up for himself?
Or is he just exercising some sympathy for people he was near at the time? We actually don't know. But the simple truth is that under normal circumstances of the British government, someone like that would be excluded from the decision. You know, if you're a minister and somebody brings you a decision which relates to your personal interest, you give it to somebody else to make the decision. You don't make it yourself. You don't, you know, let's say I had a farm and there was a decision made about my farm, I wouldn't be allowed to make it. I'd get somebody else to do it. Yeah. And this is more than a farm, this is the whole farm that Hayward is making this decision over. So he shouldn't be allowed to make the decision. That's the first thing to say. Secondly, the rules he's using. He's talking about, you know, we can't expose conversations between heads of government and so on. Well, if you're not going to expose those rules, why did you start this in the first place? Because you cannot understand why a war starts unless you hear the views of decision makers. So you've got both the motive, the man, and the excuse all wrong. Every single part of this is wrong.
Now, you've got your ear pretty close to the ground. What do you think's in the correspondence and the record of telephone calls that are being refused?
Well, I don't know what's in, but what I do know is the questions they have to answer and why they're sensitive. I mean, firstly, did Tony Blair give undertakings before he came to Parliament? In other words, did he commit Britain before Parliament had its say? Because in this day and age, as you and I took a part in over the Syrian episode, in this day and age, Parliament is now accepted, has to decide, not on wars that are reactions to being invaded, but discretionary wars, wars that you decide on, has to be done via Parliament. Now, if Blair made the decision beforehand. That's acutely embarrassing, both for Blair and his whole government, and of course for the Americans. Secondly,
well, just before you go on, that would mean that they had lied to the House, of course.
Yeah, well,
which is a hanging offence.
In this place, is a hanging offence.
Yes.
Metaphorically speaking.
Yes. Yes, we don't do hanging in Britain anymore.
I know the killing of Tony Blair is an interest to you, but so metaphorically, that is a hanging offence. Secondly, of course, there's the other possible lie to the House, which is the basis of the evidence, what is now known in Britain as the dodgy dossier, the intelligence reports which are put together in a sort of glossed up pamphlet, implying that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction, which were a threat to Britain. I mean, there was this idea of he could marshal them at 45 minutes' notice, so considerable. And
hit our bases in Cyprus.
And hit our bases and so on. So all of those things, but there are two lies straight away, you know. Then there are questions of the actual execution of the war. I mean, I know from my own experience and contacts around the British military establishment that in the run-up to the war, there were serious concerns amongst the British officer class, if you like, about how we were proposing to deal with the day after the conflict. You know, what was going to happen to the rebuilding of Iraq, what was going to happen to the government of Iraq, what was going to happen to make sure that the Iraqi people did not suffer, as in fact they ended up suffering, the huge post-war traumas. Now, that was an area where clearly some decisions must, or well, should have been made, and one presumes must have been made. How were those decisions made? How did we go into a war without knowing what the outcome would be? So there's a whole series of very, very embarrassing questions to answer. I don't know the answer to those questions, but I suspect, since we've run into this brick wall, I suspect they're not the ones that Mr. Blair would like to see.
Now, you are a former military man. You are a former minister in the Foreign Office. You have occupied commanding heights in British government, and you're still a pretty heavyweight senior guy. How, therefore, would you calibrate? How would you describe the scale of the foreign policy disaster, in my view, and in the view of the great majority of people, the invasion and occupation of Iraq?
It's one of the biggest post-war disasters. I mean, I voted for it. Let's understand this right up front. I voted for it because I was told, and I believed the Prime Minister today, one assumes the Prime Minister doesn't lie to the House of Commons, that this was a strategic necessity, that it was a threat that we had to deal with. We were lied to on that. I'm quite sure that was not true. So, so it's a massive mistake, and it's coloured all sorts of things. It's coloured our entire relationship with the Muslim world and the Middle East. It's destabilised an important part, a massively important part of the Middle East. It's caused, most of all, it's caused huge numbers of deaths, and all those things, and to no real purpose. I mean, there is a mild purpose, but not a purpose that justifies that sort of wide-scale killing. So it's a major mistake, much worse than Suez, which was viewed as a huge strategic error previous that led to the fall of the Prime Minister and resignation of the Prime Minister. So a huge mistake, and one which will colour British foreign policy, and I think American foreign policy, for a very, very long time into the future.
Killed something else too, didn't it? It killed the essential credibility of the political class in Britain and in the United States. Since Iraq, very few people believe what they're told officially. Claude Cockburn in the 1930s once said that nothing is true until it's been officially denied. Nowadays, most people don't really believe, and this is not a party point, I know you're a conservative, but nobody, again, there'll be no glad, confident morning again.
Yeah, there's always been a healthy suspicion in Britain of the political class, and I rather approve of that, frankly. But it's killed even the political class's own belief in itself. I mean, again, to come back to the Syrian debate, which we both took part in, one of the reasons that our side, the anti-war side, won was because nobody was willing to take on trust a simple statement from the government that this was necessary. You know, we
The
said,
cloud of Iraq hung over that whole debate in which we
absolutely,
participated.
it completely coloured the whole debate, and as a result, we decided, in my view, the right decision. We decided not to do anything, and indeed, actually, for Britain not to legitimise an American assault, which is what it was really about. And truthfully, actually, our involvement in Iraq, I know we committed soldiers, and I know we had hundreds of deaths. And we had some material defeats as well in terms of our military strategy. But what we were doing was legitimising an American attack. And I think that whole concept of Britain being the people who say, well, this isn't just a bit of American imperialism, this is a really necessary action, has gone, completely gone.
David Davis, thanks for joining us on Sputnik.
My pleasure.